The 6:15 a.m. train from Chicago to Milwaukee was Sarah's lifeline, her only affordable way to commute to her weekend job at the farmer's market. At 23, she juggled 3 part-time positions just to keep her cramped studio apartment and pay for her night classes in accounting. The worn canvas bag on her lap contained her entire world, a thermos of instant coffee, 2 peanut butter sandwiches, and her notebook filled with budget calculations that never seemed to add up. Sarah's eyelids felt heavy as lead. She'd worked until midnight at the diner, came home to study until 3, and now faced another 12-hour day selling organic vegetables to customers who spent more on lunch than she earned in a week. The train car was nearly empty, just her, an elderly woman knitting in the front row, and a man in an expensive charcoal suit sitting across the aisle. She tried to focus on the passing landscape, but exhaustion pulled at her consciousness like quicksand. Her head nodded forward, jerked back up, then began its inevitable descent again. The rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks became a lullaby she couldn't resist. The man across the aisle watched her struggle with sleep. His name was Marcus Wellington, though few people outside boardrooms knew that name belonged to the 32-year-old CEO of Wellington Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest sustainable farming operations in the Midwest. He'd chosen the early train specifically to avoid recognition, preferring the anonymity of public transportation over his usual private jet when traveling to inspect his properties. Marcus noticed the girl's threadbare jacket and the careful way she clutched her bag. Her face, relaxed in near sleep, showed the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from working multiple jobs. He remembered that exhaustion from his own childhood, before his grandmother's ranch became his empire. When Sarah's head finally lolled to the side, landing gently against his shoulder, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives. He didn't move away. Instead, he adjusted his position slightly to make her more comfortable and continued reading his agricultural reports, occasionally glancing down at the young woman who slept so peacefully against him. An hour passed. The elderly woman smiled knowingly at the scene before gathering her knitting and moving to the front of the car. Marcus found himself studying Sarah's face, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, the small scar above her left eyebrow that suggested a childhood accident. When his phone buzzed with a text from his ranch manager, Marcus realized they'd missed the Milwaukee stop entirely. In fact, they were approaching the small rural station near his property, a stop so insignificant that most passengers never noticed it. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Next stop, Millfield, Millfield, next stop." Sarah stirred slightly but didn't wake. Marcus looked at her peaceful expression and made another impulsive decision. When the train shuddered to a halt at Millfield, he gently lifted Sarah in his arms, grabbed her bag and carried her off the train. She weighed almost nothing, and her head nestled naturally against his chest as he walked across the platform to where his ranch truck waited. His manager, Tom Rodriguez, looked surprised to see his boss carrying an unconscious young woman. "Everything all right, Mr. Wellington?" "She fell asleep on the train," Marcus explained, settling Sarah carefully in the passenger seat. "We'll let her rest at the house until she wakes up properly. Then we'll figure out how to get her where she needs to go." The drive to Wellington Ranch took 20 minutes through rolling hills, dotted with cattle and fields of corn stretching to the horizon. Sarah slept through it all, occasionally murmuring something unintelligible but never fully waking. Marcus couldn't explain why he'd taken such an extraordinary action. Perhaps it was the vulnerability he'd seen in her sleep, or the recognition of someone fighting the same battles he'd once fought. Wellington Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime Illinois farmland. The main house, a restored Victorian mansion that had belonged to Marcus's great-grandmother, sat atop a gentle hill overlooking the entire operation. Marcus had spent millions renovating it while maintaining its original character, wraparound porches, gabled windows and gardens that his grandmother had planted decades ago. He carried Sarah to the guest room on the first floor, laying her gently on the antique quilt that covered the 4-poster bed. Her breathing was deep and regular, and color had returned to her pale cheeks. Marcus placed her bag on the nearby chair and left a glass of water on the nightstand. Downstairs, he found himself pacing the kitchen while his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, prepared breakfast. "You did what?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked exhausted, Mrs. Chen, completely worn out. "I couldn't just wake her up and send her on her way." And what happens when she wakes up in a strange place? She'll be terrified. Marcus hadn't fully considered that possibility. He'd acted on instinct, driven by a protective impulse he didn't entirely understand. We'll explain everything. Make sure she knows she's safe. But as he stood looking out the kitchen window at his vast property, Marcus wondered what had really motivated his actions. Was it genuine concern for a tired stranger, or something deeper? A loneliness that success had never quite filled. Upstairs, Sarah began to stir, her consciousness slowly returning like a tide creeping up a beach. But something was wrong. The sounds were all different. Birds chirping instead of city traffic, a gentle breeze rustling leaves instead of bus engines and car horns. And the smell, instead of exhaust fumes and urban decay, she detected fresh air tinged with hay and wildflowers. Her eyes flew open to find herself in a room she'd never seen before, sunlight streaming through lace curtains onto walls, painted a soft yellow. Panic shot through her chest like electricity. Sarah bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room was beautiful. Too beautiful, with its polished hardwood floors, antique furniture, and oil paintings of pastoral scenes, nothing like anywhere she'd ever been able to afford. Her first instinct was to run, but her legs felt unsteady as she swung them over the side of the bed. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, clutching her canvas bag like a lifeline. The last thing she remembered was settling into her train seat, fighting sleep as the morning light streamed through the windows. Now sunlight slanted differently through these windows, suggesting hours had passed. Voices drifted up from somewhere below, a man's deep tone and a woman's lighter one, speaking in what sounded like friendly conversation. Sarah crept to the window and gasped. Rolling green fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with grazing cattle, and what looked like a red barn in the distance. This wasn't Milwaukee. This wasn't anywhere near where she was supposed to be. Panic gave way to practical concern. She was supposed to be at the farmer's market by now. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the organic vegetable stand, would fire her if she didn't show up. Sarah couldn't afford to lose another job, not when she was already 2 weeks behind on rent. A gentle knock at the door made her freeze. "Come in," she called softly, her voice barely audible. The door opened to reveal an Asian woman in her 50s, carrying a tray with steaming coffee and what smelled like fresh-baked bread. Her smile was warm but cautious. "Good morning, dear. I'm Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper here. How are you feeling?" "I'm confused," Sarah admitted, accepting the tray gratefully. The coffee was real coffee, not the instant powder she was used to, and it smelled like heaven. "Where exactly am I?" "Wellington Ranch, about 40 miles southwest of Chicago. Mr. Wellington brought you here after you fell asleep on the train this morning." Mrs. Chen sat in the chair beside the bed, her manner motherly and reassuring. "He said you seemed exhausted, and when the train went past your stop, he thought it best to let you rest properly." Sarah's mind reeled. "He took me off the train, without asking me." The situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie rather than her mundane life of scraped-together paychecks and endless worry. "I know it sounds strange, dear, but Mr. Wellington isn't, well, he's not what you might expect. He grew up poor himself, you know. His grandmother raised him right here on this ranch after his parents died. He recognizes when someone's struggling." The explanation should have been comforting, but Sarah felt more confused than ever. "I need to get to Milwaukee. I have a job, responsibilities, people are counting on me." Mrs. Chen nodded understandingly. "Mr. Wellington is arranging transportation for you. But first, why don't you eat something? You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She was right. Sarah's diet consisted mainly of whatever leftovers she could take from the diner and the cheapest items from the grocery store. The tray held scrambled eggs, thick-cut bacon, fresh fruit, and bread that was still warm from the oven. Her stomach growled audibly. "Where is this Mr. Wellington?" Sarah asked between bites. The food was incredible. The eggs creamy and rich, the bacon perfectly crispy, the bread with a texture she'd never experienced from store-bought loaves. "Out checking the cattle with Tom, our ranch manager. He'll be back shortly." Mrs. Chen studied Sarah's face carefully. "Can I ask what takes you to Milwaukee every weekend?" Sarah explained about the farmer's market job, her other positions, her night school classes. As she talked, she noticed Mrs. Chen's expression growing more thoughtful, almost sad. "3 jobs," Mrs. Chen murmured. That's what Mr. Wellington was doing when he was your age. Working himself to the bone, trying to save this place after his grandmother passed. Nearly killed himself with exhaustion. But he's wealthy now, Sarah said, gesturing around the elegant room. This house, this ranch, it's like something from a magazine. Success came later and it came hard. He built Wellington Agricultural Holdings from nothing, turned sustainable farming into a multi-million-dollar operation. But he's never forgotten what it felt like to choose between rent and food. The sound of truck doors slamming interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sarah saw two men walking toward the house, one older with weathered skin and a cowboy hat, the other tall and broad-shouldered in jeans and a work shirt. Even from a distance, she recognized the second man's confident stride. "That's him," she whispered, remembering the expensive suit from the train. "The man I fell asleep on." Mrs. Chen smiled. "He's not wearing his city clothes now. Out here, he's just Marcus the rancher, though I suppose you'll be seeing a different side of him." Marcus Wellington entered the kitchen below, his voice carrying up through the old house's thin walls. "How is she, Mrs. Chen? Did she eat something?" "She's awake and asking questions, worried about her job in Milwaukee. I'll talk to her, explain the situation properly." Sarah found herself listening intently to his voice. On the train, she'd been too tired to really notice him, but now she heard the genuine concern in his tone. Still, the situation felt impossible to process. Wealthy strangers didn't just rescue exhausted waitresses and take them home to beautiful ranches. Things like that didn't happen to people like her. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Without the business suit, he looked younger, more approachable. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the morning's work, and his green eyes held an apologetic expression. "I owe you an explanation," he said, remaining in the doorway rather than entering the room. "And probably an apology." Sarah set down her coffee cup, studying his face. "Why did you do it? Take me off the train, I mean." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. You looked so tired, so overwhelmed. When you fell asleep against my shoulder, you seemed so peaceful for the first time since I'd noticed you. And when we passed Milwaukee," he shrugged, "I made an impulsive decision. I could have missed work. I might lose my job because of this. I've already called ahead to Milwaukee, found the farmer's market, spoke to Mrs. Patterson, told her you had a family emergency and would be back next weekend. She said not to worry." Sarah stared at him in shock. How did you even know where I work?" Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. "Your name tag was showing in your bag. Sarah Martinez, Patterson's Organic Vegetables. I took a guess about which farmer's market." The thoughtfulness of his actions conflicted with her natural suspicion. In Sarah's experience, when people with money helped people without it, there was always a catch. "What do you want from me?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Nothing. I want to help you get wherever you need to go. Though," he paused as if considering something, "I do have a proposition that might interest you." Sarah's guard went up immediately. In her experience, propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well for women in her position. "What kind of proposition?" she asked carefully, setting down her coffee cup and crossing her arms. Marcus seemed to sense her wariness. He stepped back from the doorway, giving her more space. "It's not what you're thinking. I need help here at the ranch, and from what Mrs. Chen tells me about your background, you might be exactly what I'm looking for." "I don't know anything about ranching," Sarah said quickly. "I've lived in the city my whole life. This isn't about cattle or farming. It's about numbers." Marcus pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, but kept a respectful distance. "Wellington Agricultural Holdings has grown faster than I expected. I need someone to help organize our financial records, manage payroll for our seasonal workers, handle correspondence with buyers, someone detail-oriented who understands what it means to stretch every dollar." Sarah frowned. "You must have accountants for that, people with degrees." "I do in Chicago, but I need someone here on site who can handle the day-to-day financial operations, someone who gets up early, works hard, and doesn't mind getting their hands dirty when necessary." He leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you're studying accounting at night. This could be real-world experience that actually pays enough to live on." The offer sounded too good to be true, which made Sarah even more suspicious. "What's the catch? And don't tell me there isn't one." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "The catch is that I'm not very good at trusting people. I've been burned before by employees who saw dollar signs instead of the work that needed to be done. I need someone who understands the value of honest work because they've had to fight for every opportunity. Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. Beneath the confident exterior, she glimpsed something familiar, the wariness of someone who'd learned not to expect help from others. Why me, though? You don't know anything about me. I know you work 3 jobs to pay for school. I know you budget down to the penny. I saw your notebook on the train. I know you're exhausted, but you keep going anyway. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. My grandmother used to say you can tell everything about a person by watching how they handle being tired. You didn't complain, didn't make a scene. You just kept trying to stay awake because you had somewhere you needed to be. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. What exactly would the job entail? Full-time position, 40 hours a week, sometimes more during harvest season. You'd have an office in the main house, handle all the ranch's bookkeeping, coordinate with our distributors, manage employee records. The pay would be $60,000 a year to start, plus health benefits and housing. Sarah's breath caught. $60,000 was more than she made from all 3 of her current jobs combined. Housing? There's a cottage on the property about half a mile from here. It belonged to the previous ranch manager before Tom moved to town with his wife. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, utilities included. The offer was overwhelming. Sarah stood up and walked to the window beside Marcus, needing to move to think. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills, horses grazing in distant pastures, a lifestyle she'd only seen in movies. This is crazy, she whispered. Yesterday I was scraping together rent money, and now you're offering me a dream job. Things like this don't happen to people like me. They don't happen to people like me either, Marcus said quietly. My grandmother died when I was 25, left me this ranch and about $50,000 in debt. I was working construction during the day and trying to learn farming at night. There were months when I lived on canned beans and whatever vegetables I could grow. Sarah turned to look at him. How did you turn it around? Hard work, good timing, and one person who took a chance on me, a distributor named Elena Santos, who agreed to buy my organic produce when I was just starting out. She could have gone with established farms, but she saw something in me. Marcus met her eyes. I've been looking for a way to pay that forward ever since. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but Sarah's practical nature kicked in. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I can't handle the responsibility? Then we'll figure it out together. But honestly, Sarah, I've seen how carefully you manage your own finances. Someone who can make ends meet on 3 part-time jobs can definitely handle ranch accounting. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom Rodriguez appeared, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a problem with the Miller contract. They're threatening to pull out unless we can guarantee delivery by next Friday. Marcus sighed. That's exactly what I'm talking about, he said to Sarah. Miller's our biggest distributor, but their contract terms change constantly. I need someone who can stay on top of these details while I focus on the farming side. Sarah watched the interaction between Marcus and Tom, noting the easy respect between them. This wasn't a boss talking down to an employee. It was a conversation between partners. Can I see the cottage? She asked suddenly. Before I decide? Marcus's face lit up with hope. Of course. Tom, can you handle the Miller situation for an hour? Already on it, boss. Take your time. The drive to the cottage took them through more of the ranch property. Marcus pointed out various buildings, the dairy barn where they processed milk from their grass-fed cattle, the greenhouses where they started seedlings, the equipment shed that housed tractors and harvesting machinery. How many people work here? Sarah asked. 12 full-time employees, about 30 seasonal workers during planting and harvest. Most of them have been with me for years. Tom's been here since the beginning. He was my grandmother's foreman and taught me everything I know about actually running a ranch. The cottage sat nestled among oak trees, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under the windows. Inside, it was cozy but spacious, with hardwood floors, a stone fireplace and a kitchen that was small but perfectly functional. The second bedroom had been set up as an office, with a desk positioned near the window overlooking a small garden. It's beautiful, Sarah said, running her hand along the kitchen counter. The cottage was nicer than any apartment she'd ever dreamed of affording. The previous manager's wife planted that garden, Marcus said, pointing through the window. Tomatoes, herbs, some flowers. You're welcome to maintain it if you're interested. Sarah imagined herself making coffee in this kitchen each morning, working at the desk in the spare room, maybe even learning to grow her own vegetables. That seemed like a fantasy, too perfect to be real. "I have one condition," she said finally. "If I take this job, I pay rent on the cottage. Not much, but something. I don't accept charity." Marcus studied her face, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Fair enough. How about 200 a month? That's what we pay for the utility bills anyway." It was a token amount, they both knew it, but it preserved her dignity. Sarah extended her hand. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow, if you're willing, though we should probably get you back to Chicago tonight to pack your things and give notice at your other jobs." As they shook hands, Sarah felt the strangest sensation, as if her life had just pivoted completely, like a door opening onto possibilities she'd never imagined. But beneath the excitement lurked a nagging worry. In her experience, good things came with hidden costs. She was about to discover just how right she was. 3 weeks into her new life at Wellington Ranch, Sarah had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could happen without a hidden agenda. She'd settled into a comfortable routine: coffee at sunrise on her cottage porch, mornings in the ranch office organizing financial records, afternoons learning the ins and outs of agricultural distribution contracts. Marcus had been nothing but professional and respectful, and the work itself was challenging but rewarding. That Thursday morning changed everything. Sarah was reviewing quarterly expense reports when she noticed something odd. Several large payments to a company called Hartwell Consulting Services didn't match any invoices in their files. The amounts were substantial: 50,000 here, 30,000 there, and they'd been going out monthly for the past year. She cross-referenced the payments with Marcus's calendar and found something troubling. Every payment coincided with visits from a man named Richard Hartwell, someone Marcus always met with privately. Sarah had seen him once, an impeccably dressed man in his 50s who'd arrived in a black sedan and left after less than an hour. Her accounting instincts kicked in. She pulled up more records going back 2 years and discovered a pattern that made her stomach drop. The payments to Hartwell had started small and grown progressively larger. More concerning, they seemed to correlate with the ranch's most profitable quarters. The more money Wellington Ranch made, the more they paid to Hartwell Consulting. Sarah spent the morning building a spreadsheet, documenting every payment, every date, every pattern she could find. By lunch, she'd uncovered what looked like systematic extortion. Someone was bleeding the ranch dry, and Marcus was either complicit or being manipulated. Her hands shook as she printed the documents. After everything Marcus had done for her, the thought that he might be involved in something illegal made her feel sick. But the numbers didn't lie, and her responsibility was to the ranch's financial integrity. She was still staring at the evidence when Marcus appeared in her office doorway. "How's it going, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost." This was the moment of truth. Sarah took a deep breath and turned her computer screen toward him. "I need to ask you about these payments to Hartwell Consulting. I can't find any supporting documentation, and the amounts are significant." Marcus's face went completely white. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the screen with an expression Sarah couldn't read. "Close the door," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart hammered as she complied. When she turned back, Marcus was sitting in the chair across from her desk, his head in his hands. "I've been waiting for someone to notice," he said. "I almost hoped someone would. Marcus, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" He looked up at her, and she saw something she'd never expected. Fear, real, bone-deep terror in the eyes of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. "Richard Hartwell isn't a consultant. He's a blackmailer." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "He has information about my past that could destroy everything I've built here." Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. "What kind of information?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch he'd poured his life into. "When I was 26, desperate to save this place after my grandmother died, I made a decision I've regretted every day since. I forged some documents to get a loan, changed some financial records to make the ranch look more profitable than it was." The confession hung in the air between them. Sarah waited, knowing there was more. "The loan went through and I was able to save the ranch. I paid it back within 2 years with interest, once the business started succeeding legitimately. I thought it was behind me. Marcus turned back to face her, but Hartwell was working at the bank back then. He kept copies of the original documents and the ones I'd altered. How long has he been blackmailing you? 18 months. It started small. He said he just needed help with some consulting fees, but the demands kept growing. Last month he wanted $75,000. Sarah looked at her spreadsheet, calculating quickly. Marcus, at this rate, he'll bankrupt you within 2 years. The ranch can't sustain these payments. I know, his voice was hollow, but if this comes out, I'll lose everything. Not just the money, my reputation, my contracts, probably criminal charges for the original fraud. Everyone who works here, everyone who depends on this place. He gestured helplessly. How do I destroy dozens of lives to save myself? Sarah studied his face, seeing not the successful CEO who'd rescued her from poverty, but a scared young man who'd made one desperate mistake and been paying for it ever since. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd suspected him of being the criminal, when in reality he was the victim. There has to be another way, she said. We can't let him keep bleeding you dry. We? Marcus looked surprised. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You trusted me with your business, with your financial records. Did you really think I'd abandon you the moment things got complicated? For the first time since she'd known him, Marcus's composed exterior cracked completely. His eyes filled with tears he was too proud to let fall. Sarah, you don't understand. If you're associated with me when this comes out, then we make sure it doesn't come out. Not the way Hartwell wants it to. Sarah turned back to her computer, her mind already racing. You said he has the original documents. Copies, he showed them to me, and he's demanding more money. Next payment is due Friday, $80,000 this time. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, studying the payment patterns, cross-referencing them with other ranch records. Slowly, an idea began to form, a risky plan that would require perfect timing and complete trust. Marcus, I need you to tell me everything about Richard Hartwell. Where he works now, who his clients are, what he cares about most. Over the next hour, Marcus shared everything he knew. Hartwell ran a small consulting firm in Chicago, catering to wealthy clients who valued discretion. His reputation was everything to him. One whiff of scandal would destroy his business. He was also, according to Marcus, incredibly arrogant and prone to bragging about his successes. Perfect, Sarah said, a plan crystallizing in her mind. Here's what we're going to do. That Friday, Richard Hartwell arrived at Wellington Ranch, expecting his largest payment yet. Instead, he found Marcus waiting in the ranch office with a briefcase full of cash and an expression of defeated resignation. $80,000, as requested, Marcus said, sliding the briefcase across the desk. But this is getting out of hand, Richard. I can't keep bleeding money like this. Hartwell smiled coldly, counting the bills with practiced efficiency. That's not my problem, Wellington. You should have thought about consequences 26 years ago. Actually, said a voice from the doorway, maybe we should talk about consequences. Hartwell spun around to see Sarah entering the office, carrying a thick folder and wearing a confident smile that didn't match her usual demeanor. Who the hell is this? Hartwell demanded. Sarah Martinez, she said, setting the folder on the desk between them. I'm a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud cases. The lie rolled off her tongue with surprising ease. Sarah had spent the week researching everything she could about Hartwell, his business, his clients, his personal life. What she'd discovered had given her the ammunition she needed. Mr. Hartwell, I've been hired by several of your consulting clients to investigate some irregularities in their accounts. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that you've been using confidential client information to extort money from other businesses. Hartwell's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah opened the folder and spread out documents. Not just the Wellington Ranch payment records, but bank statements she'd obtained through careful social engineering, business records she'd accessed through public databases, and photographs she'd taken of Hartwell meeting with various clients. Hartwell Consulting Services has been very busy, she continued. In addition to your arrangement with Mr. Wellington, I've documented similar payment patterns from at least 3 other businesses, all coincidentally timed with your consulting visits to their competitors. This was Sarah's masterstroke. She'd spent days researching Hartwell's other clients and had discovered a pattern. He consulted for several competing agricultural businesses in the region. While she couldn't prove he was blackmailing them too, the timeline was suspicious enough to create doubt. You've been using your position as a consultant to gather competitive intelligence, then approaching rival companies with insider information and demanding payment for your silence. It's a beautiful scheme, really, but you made one critical error. Hartwell was sweating now. What error? You kept records of everything. Tax filings for your consulting business, deposit records for your unusual cash influxes, even mileage logs for your trips to visit various clients. Sarah pulled out a ledger she'd created, filled with dates and amounts that painted a damning picture. The pattern is clear to anyone who knows how to look. You're bluffing, Hartwell said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Because I have meetings scheduled with 3 of your biggest clients next week. I wonder how they'll feel knowing their trusted consultant has been selling their secrets to competitors. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Thomas Brennan at Midwest Organic, Elena Rodriguez at Green Valley Farms, and Margaret Chen at Prairie Wind Ranch. They've all been very generous with their consulting fees lately, haven't they? The blood drained from Hartwell's face. These were his most lucrative clients, the foundation of his business reputation. What do you want? He whispered. Simple. You're going to return every penny you've extorted from Mr. Wellington, with interest. You're going to destroy any documents you have relating to his past business dealings, and you're going to disappear from his life permanently. And if I don't, Sarah smiled, then I make some phone calls, and your consulting business becomes very interesting to a lot of people who don't appreciate being manipulated. Corporate clients tend to be unforgiving when they discover their consultant has been working both sides of the street. The beauty of Sarah's plan was that it didn't require any lies about evidence or legal threats. Everything she'd told Hartwell was true. His pattern of behavior was suspicious. His clients would be furious if they suspected he was selling information, and his reputation would be destroyed if the business community lost trust in him. You have 48 hours to transfer $450,000 to this account, Sarah said, sliding a paper across the desk. That covers everything you've taken from Mr. Wellington, plus interest for the emotional distress you've caused. I don't have that kind of liquid cash. Then liquidate something. Sell your car, mortgage your office, cash in your retirement accounts. I really don't care how you do it. Sarah's voice turned ice cold, because if that money isn't transferred by Sunday night, Monday morning, I start making phone calls to your clients. All of them. Hartwell looked back and forth between Sarah and Marcus, realizing he was completely outmaneuvered. His blackmail scheme had been turned against him, and his victim had become his prosecutor. This is insane, he muttered, but he was already reaching for his phone. No, Sarah said quietly. Insane was thinking you could terrorize good people indefinitely without consequences. This is just justice. 2 days later, Sarah sat on her cottage porch, watching Marcus walk across the ranch grounds with a lightness in his step she'd never seen before. The money had been transferred, the documents destroyed, and Hartwell had agreed in writing to never contact Wellington Ranch again. Marcus appeared on her porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a grin that made him look 10 years younger. Any word from our friend Richard? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. Radio silence. And it'll stay that way. I may have also mentioned that I'd be monitoring his business activities for the foreseeable future, just to make sure he doesn't develop any new entrepreneurial ventures. You know, for someone who's never worked as a private investigator, you were remarkably convincing. Sarah laughed. Growing up poor teaches you to be resourceful, and working 3 jobs taught me how to research anything quickly. The rest was just confidence and good timing. I still can't believe you pulled that off. How did you know he wouldn't call your bluff? Because bullies always assume everyone else is as dishonest as they are. He never questioned whether I was really a private investigator because he would have lied in my position. Sarah sipped her coffee, feeling deeply satisfied. Plus, everything I told him was technically true. I just let him draw his own conclusions about what it meant. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Where did you learn to think like that? Survival. When you're fighting to keep your head above water, you learn to use every advantage you can find. I just applied those same skills to a different problem. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the ranch. The financial crisis was over, but more importantly, the weight of fear had been lifted from Marcus's shoulders. He was free to run his business without constantly looking over his shoulder. Sarah, Marcus said finally. Yeah, I owe you everything. This ranch, my peace of mind, my future, none of it would exist without what you did. Sarah turned to look at him, seeing gratitude and something deeper in his eyes. You don't owe me anything, Marcus. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You trusted me with your business and your secrets. That's worth more than money. Still, I want to do something to show my appreciation. A bonus, a promotion, anything you want. Sarah considered this for a moment, then smiled. Actually, there is something. Name it. I want to expand my role here. Not just managing the books, but helping you grow the business. I have ideas about new revenue streams, cost-saving measures, maybe even acquiring some of the smaller farms in the area. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I want to help you build something that lasts for generations. Marcus stared at her, seeing the ambitious, brilliant woman who'd been hidden beneath exhaustion and poverty. Partner. Partner, Sarah agreed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been a tired waitress, falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder. Tonight, she was a business partner who'd just outmaneuvered a professional extortionist. The poor girl who'd counted pennies for train fare had become the woman who'd saved Wellington Ranch through nothing more than intelligence, courage, and the kind of creative thinking that came from a lifetime of making something from nothing. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the best revenge against people who tried to keep you down was simply refusing to stay there. She'd fallen asleep on a train and woken up in a new life, one where her worth was recognized, her skills were valued, and her future was limited only by her own ambitions. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of impossible happy ending she'd never dared to dream about. And she'd earned every moment of it.